Welcome to Nightmare Coming, where folklore bleeds into reality. Every story you thought was just a tale has a truth waiting in the dark. One nightmare at a time, we dig deeper into what was left unexplained. If you dare to question what's real like, subscribe and share the story that still haunts you. Then let's step into tonight's nightmare. Story 1. The Girl in the Attic. I moved into the farmhouse in late autumn, when the air felt dry and thin enough to crack if you breathed too hard. It sat at the edge of a long gravel road, surrounded by empty fields that stretched so far you could almost believe the world ended there. The realtor told me the house had been empty for years, ever since an old widow passed away in her sleep. That kind of thing never bothered me. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. But the first night I slept there, I woke up to soft footsteps above me, light, quick and deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I froze. The ceiling creaked again, and something small rolled across the wood floor. The next morning, I climbed up to the attic. It wasn't easy. The ladder was stiff, the air thick with dust, but when I finally pushed open the hatch, sunlight cut through the narrow window, and I saw what looked like a child's room. A little bed frame, a doll missing an eye, drawings pinned to the beam's crayon lines in red and black, stick figures standing under something that looked like rain, but too heavy, too dark. I felt a pressure in my chest I couldn't explain, a kind of wrongness that made me close the hatch faster than I meant to. Later that day, I asked the old man next door, the only neighbor within a mile, if the widow had any children. He shook his head slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully, and said, "She never had kids. But sometimes people saw one in the window." That night, I left the attic light on, just in case. I could see the glow through the ceiling cracks as I lay in bed, staring up. Around 2 in the morning, it went out on its own. I got up, went to the kitchen, and tried to convince myself it was the bulb burning out. But then came the sound again, tiny, deliberate steps, crossing from one side of the attic to the other. The next morning, I went up again, determined to find proof. The air was colder than before. The drawings were gone. The doll was sitting upright on the bed now, head tilted toward me. And there, in the dust on the floor, were small footprints leading from the bed to the hatch. I should have left then, but I didn't. Something about the house made me feel responsible, like I'd interrupted something that had been quiet too long. On the 4th night, I heard humming soft, tuneless, drifting down through the ceiling. I called out, "Hello?" The sound stopped. Then a whisper close right above me. "You're not supposed to be here." My blood ran cold. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed my things and loaded the truck. Before I left, I went up to the attic one last time, because I had to know. The room was empty again. No bed, no doll, no drawings. Just one thing etched into the wood beam near the window. "Stay quiet, or she hear you." I drove away fast, not looking back. But sometimes, when it's late, and the house I live in now creaks the same way, I still hear it, that light, measured pacing, like a child walking across an attic floor she never left. And sometimes I wonder if she followed me here, still looking for someone to stay quiet with her. Story 2. The Playground Pact. It's strange how some places seem to hum with their own kind of silence. The playground behind my old apartment building was one of those places: rusty swings, a half-broken merry-go-round, and a sandbox that hadn't seen fresh sand in years. No one really went there after dark, not because anyone said it was dangerous, but because it felt like the kind of place that should be left alone once the sun dipped behind the buildings. But then, that summer, a group of kids started playing there again. They couldn't have been older than 10 or 11, all from the nearby streets. At first, I thought it was nice hearing laughter again, the creak of the swings, the sound of sneakers hitting gravel. It made the place feel alive. But soon, that laughter changed. It became more like chanting. Not loud, not wild, soft, rhythmic, like a song with no melody. I used to sit by my window at night, watching them from across the alley. They always gathered around the same tree, the one with bark so scarred it looked burned. And every few nights, there'd be a new mark carved into it. Symbols I didn't recognize, uneven lines and circles, sometimes what looked like little stick figures with hollow heads. I thought it was just kids being weird, trying to scare each other. But then one morning, the police came. They went straight for the building across from mine, the one with the blue shutters. I saw the mother crying in the doorway, clutching a photograph. Her son hadn't come home the night before. His name was Eli. I remember that because 2 days later, I saw his name scratched into the tree deep, uneven, right below one of the strange symbols. That's when I started paying attention. The next night, there were only 3 kids at the playground instead of 4. They didn't play. They stood around the tree, holding hands, whispering. I wanted to call out, to tell them to go home, but something about the way they moved stopped me. Their heads tilted at the same angle. Their shadows stretched too long across the gravel, even though the lamppost above them barely flickered. Around midnight, I heard knocking on my door, 3 slow knocks, perfectly spaced. I didn't answer. I just listened. Then I heard small footsteps running down the hall. When I finally opened the door, there was nothing there except a handful of gravel, the kind from the playground scattered on my doormat. The next week, another child went missing, a girl this time, one of the 3 I'd seen last. And again, her name appeared on the tree. I tried telling the police what I'd seen, but they said there were no signs of foul play. The kids run away sometimes. The night after that, the playground was empty. For the first time all summer, silent. I went out there myself, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air smelled like rain and something metallic. The carvings on the tree seemed deeper now, like they'd been pressed in with heat instead of a knife. Near the base, half buried in the dirt, I found something small, 4 intertwined strings of friendship bracelets, tied in a knot that had been burned shut. I brought them home and left them on the table, unsure what to do. That night, I dreamed of the kids standing around my bed, whispering that same wordless chant. When I woke up, the bracelets were gone. The police eventually closed the missing person cases. Families moved away. The playground was fenced off and left to rot. But sometimes, when I walk by it even now, I hear that faint rhythm again, the low hum of children's voices rising with the wind. And every time I pass, I swear I see new carvings on that tree, names that weren't there before. Sometimes I wonder if one night, someone will carve mine too. Story 3. My brother's new friend. When my younger brother, Caleb, started talking to someone he called the boy under the bed, I thought it was just another phase. He was 6, imaginative, and always talking to invisible people or stuffed animals. But this time was different. He didn't just talk to this boy, he listened to him. Every night, I'd hear his tiny voice through the thin wall between our rooms, whispering things too quietly to make out. I'd knock and tell him to go to sleep, and he'd answer, "I can't. He's not done yet." I'd ask who, and he'd say, "My friend. He doesn't like it when you listen." The first time he said that, I remember laughing it off. But the next day, Caleb wasn't laughing. He sat at breakfast pale and silent, his cereal soggy in the bowl. I asked what was wrong, and he said, "He told me you don't believe in him. He's mad now." That night, I left my door open a crack. I wanted to prove it was all in his head. But around midnight, I woke to a sound of scrape, like fingernails dragging slowly across the floor. Then a whisper coming from Caleb's room. "Don't look." I sat up, my heart pounding, and crept toward his door. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. "What are you doing?" I asked. He didn't move. I followed his gaze and saw that the blanket hanging over the side was moving, just slightly, like something underneath had brushed against it. I pulled the blanket back, expecting maybe a mouse, maybe nothing. But there was a hollow space under the bed, too dark, too deep. The smell coming from it was strange, like wet earth, like something that had been buried. I reached my hand in with my phone's flashlight, and for a moment, the beam caught something a shape that shouldn't have been there. Not a face, but the idea of one, pressed against the darkness, like a memory trying to take form. I jerked my hand back, pulled Caleb close, and turned on every light in the room. The shadow was gone. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, that maybe Caleb was having nightmares, and I was letting them get to me. But over the next few days, small things began disappearing: keys, socks, my mother's necklace. We'd find them later in strange places: the freezer, the bathtub, once even under my pillow. Caleb said it was the boy playing. Then, one afternoon, my mom found scratches under Caleb's bed. Long, parallel grooves dug into the wood. She thought it was a rat. She called pest control, and they checked everything: no droppings, no tunnels, no sign of infestation. But the next morning, more scratches appeared. That same night, Caleb came into my room and shook me awake. "He wants you to come talk to him," he whispered. His eyes looked glassy, unfocused. I told him to go back to bed, but he grabbed my arm with surprising strength and said, "He said if you don't, he'll come anyway." I didn't know what to do, so I followed him. When we got to his room, he crawled under the bed. I panicked and pulled him back out, yelling, but he screamed at me to stop. "You'll make him angry." I dragged him out and slammed the door, locking it behind us. For a few seconds, the house went silent. Then something hit the other side of the door, 3 sharp, rhythmic bangs that shook the frame. We ran to my mother's room, and when she came to see what was happening, the door to Caleb's room was wide open. The bed had been flipped. The floorboards underneath were cracked. Caleb never slept there again. We moved a month later. He doesn't talk about the boy anymore, but he still won't sleep without a light on. And sometimes when the room gets too quiet, he looks at the floor and says softly, "He still knows where we live." Sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I hear a faint scratching under my own bed, slow and steady, like a reminder that maybe Caleb wasn't the only one he ever wanted to talk to. Story 4. The birthday tape. A few months ago, I was cleaning out the basement at my mother's house after she decided to sell it. I hadn't been down there in years. The air was thick with dust, that damp concrete smell that never really goes away, and every box I opened was like peeling back a layer of our family's history. Near the bottom of one stack, inside a plastic tub marked Home Videos, I found an old VHS tape labeled Caleb's 8th birthday. The handwriting was mine. I remembered the day vaguely: balloons, cake, a rented clown who scared the kids more than he entertained them. But what made me pause was the fact that I didn't remember ever recording it myself. I didn't even own a camcorder back then. I set up an old player that still half worked, wiped the dust from the screen, and pressed play. The footage flickered to life, grainy, washed-out colors, the way old tapes always look. There was the living room, full of kids in paper hats, music playing, laughter spilling over each other. My brother was in the center, grinning, blowing out his candles. I felt a rush of nostalgia, that weird warmth of seeing yourself and everyone you love frozen in time. But then, in the corner of the frame, near the doorway, stood a child I didn't recognize. He wasn't part of the party. He wasn't smiling, just standing still, hands at his sides, staring straight into the camera. At first, I thought it was a glitch, maybe someone's kid who wandered in. But the more I watched, the less that made sense. No one seemed to notice him, not once. even when Caleb ran right past him. The boy's head followed him slightly, his eyes never blinking. The tape continued games, presents, laughter, and yet every few seconds, the boy would appear again in different spots. By the window, behind the couch, near the hallway. Always staring, always motionless. I stopped the tape, rewound, and paused at the first clear frame of his face. The image was fuzzy, but enough detail showed through to make my stomach turn. It looked like Caleb, or at least someone who resembled him. Same jawline, same eyes, but older. The proportions were wrong, like his face had been stretched to fit something that wasn't quite human. I ejected the tape, my hands shaking. I told myself maybe it was a cousin, a neighbor's kid, someone I'd forgotten. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That night, I called Caleb. He lives a few towns over now, married, 2 kids. When I mentioned the tape, his voice went flat. "Don't watch it again," he said. "Just throw it away." I asked him why, and after a long pause, he said, "Because I saw him too." He told me when he was a kid, he used to dream of a boy standing in the corner of his room, watching him sleep. He said the boy never moved or spoke, just stared, with that same expression. One night, he dreamed the boy crawled onto the bed and whispered, "You can be me now." He woke up screaming and didn't tell anyone until years later. Hearing that made something in me tighten, a quiet dread that wouldn't let go. I didn't throw the tape away. I couldn't. I needed to know. So I watched it again, this time late at night, the house completely dark. Halfway through, I noticed something new, faint audio beneath the laughter, like whispering. I turned up the volume, and a voice, faint but clear, said, "He's still here." The tape flickered, the image distorted, and for a split second, the boy's face filled the screen, closer than before, eyes wide, mouth open as if frozen mid-scream. The picture cut to static, and when it came back, the room on the tape was empty. No kids, no music, no light, just the quiet living room, filmed in total stillness. But the camera was still running. Then, from the bottom of the frame, a shape moved low, crawling like something pulling itself toward the lens. I stopped the tape and yanked it out, heart pounding. The screen went black, but for a second, I thought I saw my own reflection, looking back not from the glass of the TV, but from inside it. The next morning, I put the tape in a drawer, locked it, and left it in the basement. My mother's house was sold a week later. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine the new family unpacking down there, finding that old box. Maybe curiosity will get the better of them too. Maybe they'll play the tape, and maybe they'll notice right before the static hits that the boy isn't in the background anymore. He's closer, much closer. I used to think the worst kind of fear came from monsters or ghosts, things you could name, define, or at least separate from yourself. But these stories taught me something quieter, something heavier. Evil doesn't always come from the dark corners of the world. Sometimes it grows where innocence used to live. Sometimes it wears a child's face, smiles with a child's mouth, and waits for someone kind enough to listen. I still remember each of their voices, the girl's soft humming, the children chanting by the tree, my brother whispering to something beneath his bed, and that static whisper on the tape saying, "He's still here." I tried to tell myself these were coincidences, tricks of memory, imagination, filling the gaps of childhood fear. But every time I close my eyes, I see them again, not as ghosts, not as monsters, but as memories too sharp to fade. There's a certain kind of silence that settles before something wrong happens, a stillness that feels almost alive. That's the feeling I can't shake, the one that visits me right before I hear a floorboard creak or a whisper where no one stands. Maybe the story's ended. Maybe they didn't. I don't look under my bed anymore. I don't go near old playgrounds. And I never, ever watch home videos alone. Because deep down, I think they're all connected: the girl, the tree, the boy, the tape. I think they were never different stories at all, but different ways of telling the same one. And sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for me to finish what they started.